Well, I think what we learned is that the Republican Party is essentially back to being strong and prepared to win. They beat back some challenges from some upstart candidates who had support from the Tea Party, but generally speaking, what you saw was that incumbents won, and largely you saw the establishment win. He has a lot of momentum because one of the things that you saw was after the race was called, when Matt Bevin essentially conceded, he didn't quite endorse Senator McConnell, but he was ready to essentially turn fire on Allison Lundergan Grimes. And what you also saw from the various groups that supported Bevin was, again, strong words of support for Mitch McConnell's race. They really turned around and essentially said, this is a general election fight now, and there's no way that a Democrat is going to win in Kentucky. I think that's an interesting question, largely because what you see is that third parties or factions within a political party, when they sort of make the kind of noise that the Tea Party did in 2010, what you always see is that they change the coalitional makeup of the party itself. We saw this all through the 90s as a result of Ross Perot's run. Both the Democrats and the Republicans actually became different parties because of the pressure that was exerted from a Ross Perot run. And in the last few years, we've seen that pressure from the Tea Party and those members to move the Republican Party toward the right, toward a small government. And what you see is more and more of the establishment articulating those ideas. Many of the races that we are going to be watching come November didn't necessarily hold their primaries on Tuesday. They have been either happening as we have already had races occur, as in North Carolina. You saw Tom Tillis secure the Republican nomination. He'll be taking on Senator Kay Hagan, who is a vulnerable incumbent there. And then there's a race in Alaska where Senator Mark Begich, who is the Democratic incumbent and is fairly vulnerable in that state where Obama has low approval ratings, doesn't yet know his challenger because their primary isn't until August. And so that race will be really critical in terms of whether or not the Republicans can come together, win that seat, and eventually take 6 seats for the Senate. Well, Georgia is a state to look at, as is Kentucky. I mean, one of the things that you're going to see in Georgia is because of the runoff election, there's going to be some question about where those Tea Party sort of affiliated Republicans are really going to align themselves. Had Karen Handel essentially won a spot in the runoff, it would have been very clear where sort of those Tea Party Republicans would have gone. Now with Purdue and Kingston, it's going to be something of an open question as to how they come out and align. I would be watching where Handel decides to throw her support. Well, certainly what we see is that two Democratic women who have sort of histories in the state and are popular in their state, Allison Lundergan Grimes in Kentucky and Michelle Nunn in Georgia, have tremendous support from their political parties to take on essentially these incumbents, at least with regard to Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, and really whoever emerges from the Republican primary in the Republican runoff in Georgia. But when we look toward November, the real question is going to be whether these women who have these strong names are going to be able to bring together their supporters and turn out their votes. These are red states. Republican enthusiasm is running higher. We also see that Republicans are ahead on the generic ballot, and we also see that presidential approval in those states is very low. So Obama is running lower than his national average in those states, and it may be a really tough climb, really, for both Nunn and Grimes to prevail. Well, I think the interesting part about the Margolies race is that she had been, in many ways, a very weak candidate. She hadn't done much fundraising. She had spent a lot of her money on high-priced consultants, but she had the Clinton name. And not only did she have essentially the Clinton name because they are essentially her in-laws. Her son is married to Chelsea. What we really know is that she made the decisive vote in the '93 budget on behalf of President Clinton's proposal. And so she was in every way, shape, and form seen as the Clinton candidate. And both Hillary and Bill went and campaigned for her. And for her to lose that race and lose it pretty handily was something of a pushback. It was also the first candidate that Hillary Clinton had endorsed in this cycle. So, now that she's lost, there are some questions about how ready is the country, or at least Pennsylvania, for Hillary. And certainly, when you look at how the votes split out, Margolies did win essentially the Montgomery County suburban part of the district, which had been her old district. Brendan Boyle picked up the Philadelphia County portion of the district, where he has been a state rep, and he worked very hard and, believe it or not, bested her by over 50 points in Philadelphia County alone. And when you put these things together, he ended up with a very strong and very decisive win. And it really does raise a question as to how much the Clinton magic will be able to sort of reignite in the future.